Welcome to the podcast, Lawrence. So nice to have you, man.
Thank you. Thanks, Ethan. It's really great to be here. Exciting times to connect with you in this space. We've had informal chats and, been sort of in each other's worlds a little bit. So this is really exciting to connect and share some ideas that may well ripple beyond our immediate sphere.
Yeah, totally. Um, yeah, so I'm interested for the audience a bit more to hear a little bit about your story. What type of work are you doing these days? Where are you at? What's most exciting to you? And yeah, what's alive in your world these days?
Yeah. So right now, what's alive for me is community living. And right now, that reality has me in North Wales in the UK, living in the woods. Beautiful part of the world, just to be close to the mountains and the raw and wild nature that Wales hasn't lost. Maybe it's changed forms, but yeah, there's still something really incredibly primordial in the energy around here. Sometimes, like it's just it just feels like nature is still very present. And so that's been it's been a long time coming for me. Grew up in a normal kind of suburban environment and have lived in towns and cities most of my life, and was lucky enough to live in Hong Kong when I was 5 with my family. So quite early on got this experience of living in a different culture and something. My eyes were opened to to a very different world to the world that I'd for the first 5 years of my life had been like, okay, so this is Earth, this is what it's all about, and then to go somewhere that's totally different, and that's definitely fueled my interest and curiosity in in people and places and just how much there is to see and do in this incredible world. So traveling's been a big part of it. There's stints in various countries. Australia, I lived in Australia for 3.5 years, so that's probably the most significant part of my traveling. And now I find myself back here in North Wales, feeling really feeling at home, so much so. But it's funny, it's felt like every step of the journey away from this feeling of home has been really important for me now, finding it again, in a sense.
I would love to hear you speak on ecological consciousness. I'm getting this sense that being in that environment so close to nature in Wales, I'm getting the sense of that perhaps maybe you're cultivating some sort of ecological consciousness, some sort of different relationship with nature and the world, and maybe there's I'm imagining the feeling of being home maybe is related to that somehow. I'd love to hear you expand on that a bit.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, it's a curious term, and and the context in which it kind of first came to me and that it gets kind of spoken about a lot is in deep ecology, integral ecology, and so ecological consciousness is that very idea of sort of being aware of a system within which I am a part. And so it's that, that's the sort of the basic idea is rather than a good way to kind of draw a comparison would be from ecological. So, that whole concept of personal identity, sense of just me, of thinking about myself, and that whole paradigm of personal success and personal gain, ecological, to then shifting probably from there to say world centric would be a shift. So from myself to probably ethnological, so to the species, to think about not just me but the human species, and so wow, I'm part of this whole human race, and there's so much diversity and so much just amazing variety in the way that we live, and being fascinated by the human experience is, yeah, as I mentioned, I think traveling and having my eyes opened early was a really cool experience of that, just to broaden out a little bit. And then from there, yeah, world centric. So world centric is the other like species, like the planet having a bit of a curiosity around it. Like that's where like ecology, the study of ecology, is probably the
Right.
things like that idea of like looking at nature and like, oh yeah, wow, there's all of these different things other than humans that share this planet, and a lot of them are alive or show signs of, there's that first curiosity around, oh wow, we're not, yeah, we're not the only thing that this planet has done. We're not the only thing that this beautiful earth has created. Um, and then that for me, then wow, there's that acknowledgement of something kind of like the whole of that, the fact that we're all humans, and then this kind of wider life is actually all part of something bigger. It's all sort of part of an emergent whole, and a continually emergent whole, and so then to be able to know that and sort of ponder what that means, and then from there to actually then broaden out a bit and sort of sit with it and really feel that, embody that sense of like, whoa, if my awareness can kind of move out to that level and really just like start to see the interdependence, the interconnectedness between all humans, but also, yeah, all life on this earth and everything that's happening, this regulation, this yeah, you could say like a self-regulating system, and we're part of that, so it's that realm we're looking at with ecological consciousness. And so, yeah, where I am right now, living in a community which is it's like an eco retreat center, so natural building, working with creating with the land, working with some more feminine principles of actually making things with the land that's here, and growing food to eat from this very land, and honoring the seasons, honoring the cycles, and things like that. And all of that feels, yeah, like it's that ecological awareness, ecological honoring. And yeah, it's then bordering on that whole concept of like animistic spirituality, where we see and experience spirit and what many would call God, in everything, in the trees, in the whole of creation, and all of that actually being a mirror to what's within us here.
Right. Amazing. um I'm reminded of what the term that kept coming up was separateness versus interdependency, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm a human, I'm separate from the world. And now it's like, oh, I've been playing with this phrase, which is like distinct but not separate, right? So it's like, all right, there's a human body here which is separate from this animal out in nature that I'm looking at, but there's no separateness there. They're all part of the same ecological consciousness. This is what kept coming up as you were speaking, and I think it's beautiful, the exploration of interdependence. And I'm imagining that your exploration of interdependence has a lot of overlap with this with how I've been trying to embody interdependence, right? I think you spoke a little bit about what is like the living experience of interdependence. The thing that I've found that I've been grappling with the most is like interdependence makes a lot of sense, like on a conceptual level. Makes a lot of sense, right? You can't exist if you don't have food to eat, and the food is necessary. Like the sun needs to be there in order to grow the food, and you can go through that mental loop long enough where you're like, all right, yes, we do need everything in the universe in order to exist. Everything is interdependent. But I noticed in my life that conceptual interdependence was much different than getting glimpses of like a sort of embodied interdependence. What's been your experience with like embodied interdependence, if you're open to sharing?
Yeah, of course, brother. What a beautiful question. And there definitely is a distinction. You know, we've spoken about this kind of idea of different levels of knowing, levels of connection to a concept, or connection to an idea, to a reality. And so yeah, there's that cognitive or conceptual sense of like interdependence, which may also always feel a bit abstract compared to like, well, those moments where we really grok that. And that can be a difficult thing, you know, especially if we've had this reinforced sense of self and this reinforced sense of a rather scientific third quadrant, you know, to sort of bring in the integral idea, you know, of like that external things, you know. So yeah. So when I facilitate deep ecology work, part of the way that I like to introduce what deep ecology is about is, you know, growing up in the Western world, growing up in mainstream schooling, science taught me that I am me and a tree is a tree, and there's a relationship. Like the tree gives off oxygen, I breathe it in, and you know, I breathe out carbon dioxide, the tree absorbs that, and it's beautiful. And also focuses quite heavily on the system of those kind of distinct parts and parts of that process, right? And it might still be implicit that, you know, that creates a sort of a whole, if you will. Like all of those parts are kind of identifiable as this reciprocal relationship between the tree and me. However, if it's purely viewed in that mechanistic term and purely just seen as a process that is not in some way living or magic, or in some way has us feel like, whoa, that is a miracle. That is like, how did that ever come to be? That symbiotic relationship between two largely different you know, forms of matter. It's fucking phenomenal, right? And so I'd love for my science teacher to have said something like that, right? But no, it's so cut and clean and dry, and like, here's a leaf and you can see the cells and we're looking at that. And so deep ecology for me was this beautiful reconnection to the magic and the spirit of it all. And so the embodied sense of interdependence, interconnectedness comes from, yeah, a felt sense from really exploring and opening our heart to express a little bit more deeply about what do we feel when we connect with nature. What does it mean to connect with nature? Right. Because so much of our lives, so many of us are maybe not living in a space that has a great tree to human ratio. Like maybe it's like, you know, a park nearby, or like a really urban environment where there's not much leaves. And even coming into nature, what's that experience like for people? And so there's this Arnie Ness, who's really the founder of the deep ecology, sort of, he coined the term deep ecology back in the 70s, and he's a philosopher and a mountaineer, and he spent a lot of time in nature by himself. And, you know, and he sort of speaks to this idea of a forest that hasn't had a road put through it, right? And actually it got me thinking. I was like, all right, how many forests have I visited where there's not like a path or a road or some sort of human intervention through the middle? And he said, until you've gone to a forest that doesn't have a road through it, like, and hasn't had its heart removed, it's that whole concept of like the heart of the forest, like there's a distinct difference. And that got me thinking. It was like, well, it's like, if it's on the feeling level, if it's just something that can't really be explained or described, like it has to be felt, then it's kind of this forestness, right? Like there's this way it makes us feel. And have you ever experienced that? You walk to the threshold of a woodland, and then stepping into that space, there's a difference. You know, we could describe it scientifically as air quality. We could describe it scientifically as like humidity, because of the trees, like the light changes. There are all these explanations for what's happening, and yet it only feels like part of the picture. It feels like we can always reduce it down to the science. And yet to acknowledge that what we feel inside is due to something that is occurring within this environment, this ecosystem of a forest, that connects us to the place in a way that science doesn't need to be able to explain, in a way that we leave feeling rejuvenated and refreshed and like, oh, like, wow, I need to spend more time in nature. How many times have you heard people say that? It's like, why? Not because of a tree is made of cells and oxygen. Like, no, we're not even thinking about the science. And so for me, like, yeah, having those lived experiences and being okay that they are a completely different part of reality to what science ever needs to be able to describe. It's like that fusion of the spirit and the science again, and even just moving beyond those terms to just being okay with being part of something more, that the mind doesn't need to fully understand.
I love it. Oh, I can't recall any time I've went to nature and been like, this was bad, I'm not going to do this again. You know, every single time it's like, I got to do this more. And then I come back and I just forget that was ever a thing. And then I'm like, oh, there goes another 3 months without going, you know, deep into nature. Or I'm like, what? Like, why is there such resistance to it? I don't know. It's so comfortable in this little box I'm in, I guess. But it was coming up is I heard something very interesting recently, which was like, we use the word system a lot. Right? And there's a lot of talk these days about like complex systems. What are all the interdependencies of these systems? But I was going really deep into the work of Nora Bateson. She basically says, has anyone ever used the word system? Like, what comes up when you think of the word system? Most of the time it's like a mechanical, all the parts are connected, right? You look at, and she's like, look up system on Google, look up all the images that pop up when you type in system. What is it? It's like computers and mechanics and parts and gears and all this stuff. And it's like she's basically like, we need a different word. System is like such mechanical in nature. That's how we think about it. And that what was coming up as you were speaking about like the science and the parts. It's like, yeah, in one like small sense, like, all right, science is getting at some sort of interdependency, right? You breathe out carbon dioxide, the trees bring in oxygen, but it's still like working only with parts. Like this part of you is taken in by this part of it, and there's no, it's like it still feels dead is what I was getting from you as you were communicating it. Like there's a certain interdependency in science, but it's like a interdependency among dead matter that's interacting with each other. And then it turns into life somehow. We don't know how, but it's all the parts seem kind of just mechanical and dead. We don't really know how they work together. And it's like, what if we were to view everything as dynamic and living and breathing and alive and changing and why is there such a focus on perceiving things as dead parts, right? Like everything's alive, and I get the sense of like, yeah, you can't reduce things down to dead parts, right? Like when you go into the forest, the experience of going into a forest, you can't reduce that. It's like there's something there. There's like this felt experience.
And you don't want to either. Like it's not the first thing, you know, unless there's an ecologist or a scientist who's going in to analyze things and they've got that mindset on, then for sure. But the average human, like who goes into that, they're there to enjoy, to have an experience. Like that's such a key word. Key word.
Well, I was having a conversation with this philosopher a couple of months back. We were talking about beauty a lot. And basically this thing is like, we were even arguing that like, you can't reduce it. It's impossible, right? You go into a forest and you just have this experience of beauty. You're like, oh, wow, like you're just like awestruck, right? You can't like, what is that? What is beauty? Like, you can't reduce that, you know? It's like, all right, sure, there's like physical cells and everything, but then there's also this layer of like direct experience, direct connection and relationship to something that's just magnificent and beautiful and incomprehensible, right? And like you can't reduce that. But
Mm.
Yeah, does anything come up?
Yeah, when you were speaking just before around like the system, there's this sort of like this dead just parts, like it's procedural and logical, and it just doesn't sound great at all, to consider that, and that's not something that's alive in a forest. And interdependence, I was thinking about it, like, yeah, there's a scientific or mechanistic form of interdependence, and we can sort of view that in just a purely kind of materialistic view of nature, and also in human systems as well. Like the image I got was a factory, like, like production workers and stuff. Like the factory is, in a sense, is dependent on the workforce, and the workforce, they've all got their own job within the production line, right? And so there's a sense of interdependence on like each part of that system. Each human within that system is a part that needs to do its job, right? And yet, like, that doesn't feel like a beautiful experience to be had, right? And so like it's kind of like on the human level, there's a healthy or a what feels like a really holistic form of interdependence, but there can also still be that. So my question that comes up is around like, the difference there. Like when we talk about interdependence, what's the difference that makes the difference for it being the kind of relations that we want, like factory worker interdependence, or there's got to be a term for what we're looking to create, sort of like thriving life interdependence.
Well, what's coming up the most, I'm getting this sense of, it's a very kind of simple interdependence, like a factory, right? If you look at a forest, there's an infinite number of different relationalities happening all at once, and you can't even fathom trying to comprehend all of the different ways in which the forest is interdependent with where the bugs and the dirt and then the roots and the water
mycelium.
And the mycelium, all the different trees are growing in different directions. They all supporting the whole in a different way, and it's like so complex. Where a factory is like got these workers, and they do this, and then this happens. It's like pretty simple to understand. And I'm curious how I've been approaching this lately has been through this phrase, mutual learning, right? Like what does it feel like to be in a system, and like what is that feeling of connection within an ecology? And what I've been moving towards is like this mutual learning thing, right? There's a flow of like communication, and like, whereas if I feel like I'm a separate body, then it's like I'm here, that's out there, there's no communication there. It's just like they're separate. Whereas like being in connection is like there's like some sort of way that I am like learning from nature, and then it's learning from me, or like all the different aspects of the interdependency are like in a mutual learning process. And to me, mutual learning has this like living, breathing, dynamic aspect to it, right? To be in a like process of mutual learning with other people, with nature, with the entire ecology is like this living, breathing, dynamic pattern. I never know what I'm going to learn. I never know what the communication is going to take next. And it's like this, it's so alive. I'm curious if that brings anything up.
There's this great work that reconnects process, which really supports like an embodied experience of that interdependence, from the perspective of like having to be quite dynamically aware, and sort of there's this what if I explain it, might come through a bit smoother, but it's like you get a group of people together and you put them into groups of 3 and you tell them to move around the space. as a three, and they've got to keep equal distance away from each other, and they start moving around the space like that. And then there are other groups intersecting and things like that. And then at various times, you can do things like tap one person on the shoulder, and then they drop to the floor, and the other two people have to stand there. And then that obviously impacts and affects all the other groups because they have to be mindful of that static within the dynamic. And then there are other like rules and sort of instructions that you can give in to really influence. And what it does really beautifully is it really demonstrates to people like what needs to within a living dynamic system. There's always these things that are changing and adapting, and that does happen for us on a level as humans. And yet we can be so disconnected from that and what it actually means. And so to kind of bring it into this context of a bit of a game, a bit of a process, it really helps to reconnect people to like, often you'd follow that up with a talk to be like, okay, so now let's think about that on an ecological level, on a level of all systems on Earth. And we've got like, you remember when the Amazon was on fire? Like, what happened there? Like, it feels like a distant memory now. Like, I just thought it was like, oh shit, like that was huge. But so, for example, you could say if we lost X amount of the virgin rainforest in the world, and our oxygen supply decreased, that's going to affect not only the world around it but everything. We all breathe oxygen, we all need oxygen. And like if food overfishing, if that got serious and like all of a sudden that, like the effect that would have on the whole world, and it's already happening. This is the thing, we're so fractured and so disconnected from the sense of the whole and what's happening, that like it's something can happen in one place and affect like a whole population. A lot of it's weather systems and things at the moment, and it's like we'd rather just adapt to a new normal and be like, oh, it's okay, maybe that's a really intelligent system, but there's something missing from that. Like, yeah, we can adapt and say, oh, okay, well, now there's a typhoon every year that just comes through and destroys an island nation, and it kind of just becomes part of the narrative, right? Isn't that fucking scary? That for whatever reason it feels easier for us to just sort of let that keep happening and not really look at why it's happening, or at least not seem to be like that's the dominant thing that we're reflecting on. Like, it seems as if we've come to be able to adapt to things, but at the expense of really feeling how inappropriate they are for us, as a species looking to evolve to create a world that supports and values all thriving life.
Beautiful. I'm reminded of Charles Eisenstein and his work, where he talks about like we're trying to get ever more control over nature, right? We don't care if the world's gonna go to crap. We're like, oh, we'll just build our own isolated, boxes that are perfectly optimized for human life. And all the time, like you mentioned, like a typhoon, like are this typhoons slamming into destroying cities, but we're just gonna stay in our boxes, and these are insulated from all of the outside world. He's like, do we really want to be like completely insulated from everything? Is that the life? Is that an enjoyable way to live, to just be insulated from the rest of the ecology of life and to the rest of the planet at large? And it's like, or like, would you want to live in that world? Like, don't we want to live in a world where we are actually still in mutual learning with nature, where we're still in some sort of ecological part of some ecology? Like, do we want to we're like trying to like separate ourselves from the ecology and then say, all right, no matter how bad the ecology gets, we're in our box, we're separated, we're isolated. And it's like, wouldn't that just like perpetuate more separation and isolation and feeling of disconnection from like life at large? And you actually started getting into a direction I really wanted to head in, was like I'm very, very curious about the workshops that you're running, and like how are you like running these workshops and these courses and these retreats? Like what are some things you're doing to, you know, get this feeling of connection with ecological consciousness, or what are some of the exciting ways that you're using workshops as a medium to, you know, help people cultivate different states of being, or whatever it is the goal and mission is with those? I'm just fascinated to hear about that more.
Yeah, so the work that we do at Yes and, sort of our mission statement um, is around creating a more generative human presence on the planet. So shifting consciousness for a more generative human presence on the planet. We work in three sort of main areas with that we see as being the key ones to sort of develop or support development in, and that's human development. So that's the inner work. It's also kind of like social development, community living, as well as you know, doing deep work like shadow work, and then there's business for good. So it's kind of like, you know, getting to that idea of, yeah, we need to form organizations or communities around creating things, products, services, and whatever. But how can we shift into a paradigm that's a little bit more circular in an economy? Or yeah, there's a guy called Andrew Hewitt who uses the term win for all. Like, why can't we live in a win for all world? And we're kind of starting to see that with Bitcoin and crypto, you know, like those kind of notions of there's plenty of room at the top if we just open up the pyramid, you know, open up that triangle. So that's business for good. Which actually the arena within business for good is about shifting the consciousness of the CEO, right? Like if we can start to develop leaders who are thinking in ecological terms, and who are you know, not stuck in this kind of like really personal sense of like gain and drawing resources and energy and all those kind of other things into themselves, you know, it's got to be dispersed into a web or a network, you know. So yeah, shifting the attitude and the awareness at that level is part of that. Regenerative living. So that is regeneration of systems, regeneration of nature, living more closely to nature, localization, and regeneration of ourselves. So, you know, are we balancing the energy that we give with the energy that we replenish within ourselves? What are the things that we can do more of in our lives to really recharge, so that we're giving from a cup that's overflowing, giving from a full place, not from depletion? And so those three areas, you know, we design our courses and retreats and workshops to kind of fit into those, and we use sort of several different styles of work. One is the one-to-one developmental coaching. That's kind of our main one, and that's the deep work, right? Like the personal development, which supports people to understand everything that they've experienced up until this point, and how like that's informed their sense of self, their sense of identity, and things like that. And yeah, it's, broadly speaking, you know, this kind of work is about showing us who we take ourselves to be, showing us who we've been told we are, and then showing us how much of a slice of something so much bigger and more. Yeah, so there's the one-to-one developmental coaching is sort of the deep work that we do, and that's all about supporting people to live a more values-based life, essentially. So that is an introduction to themselves, in the fullest sense of the word self as well. You know, we are often told or led to believe that, you know, we are simply a sum of experiences and stories that the mind represents to us, and we call it life, and we call it who we are, and it's a part of that for sure. And yet, as many traditions and sort of spiritual teachers will kind of speak to, there is more than that. There is more. There is this sense of self, this beingness beyond that mental narrative and the mental construct. And so it's an experience that anyone can have of that space, of that truth of all that we are. And so that's the deep one-to-one work that we do. And that principle of developmental work and moving beyond the so sorry, dude. Honestly, like it's never normally this bad. I promise. It's
All good.
Are we still recording? We're still
Yeah.
recording. You're gonna have some editing to do.
I'll do some editing. You just stopped with the principle of, I thought you were going to say the word mind, but maybe not, but the principle of something.
Yeah, difficult to backtrack in these flows.
Mm. I want to do take 3 on one-on-one developmental coaching.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe that's not the place to start, actually.
Here. Okay, so I'm just so fascinated with the in-person in the workshops and everything you're doing with that. And I'm very curious to hear, what are like the different practices, techniques, games, flows, like what are you doing in these workshops to facilitate feelings of connection with nature, or the other pillars that you guys, regenerative, focus on the planet, business as good, like how are you actually cultivating and helping people develop into these things?
So much of what we do is about the experience, the felt sense, or the experiential journey. So that's kind of that's the kind of intersection of what we do at Yes And, is to create transformational experiences. And whether that's retreats, whether that's workshops in person or online as well. You know, a lot of people seem to be a bit anti the online space, but you know, there's still some pretty amazing stuff that can happen, and it's got a whole different set of possibilities and benefits. And yeah, we like to bring in a mixture of like deep inquiry and sort of really facing up to all of the ways in which we've been led to believe or have grown up believing who we are, and then the limits of that. You know, and the potentially narrow perspective on the world. You know, we were speaking earlier about science and speaking earlier about like this very materialistic view of the world, and often that can be what makes up someone's reality, right? Was for me for a long time, you know, definitely. And so yeah, just opening up to something a little bit more felt and a little less mind, a little bit more in the body, a little bit more connection to the heart, and living from that space. It's not always pretty, you know. Sometimes it takes a lot of letting go of who we have taken ourselves to be, and what we have constructed as a way to view and understand reality. And so the whole process of realizing that all of those things that we thought we knew about the world are true from our perspective, and yet not necessarily truth. That process can it needs some care. And so whether we do like workshops, a lot of the time there'll be an element of group inquiry or sharing. That's a really powerful part of this. And even in our one-to-one coaching that we do as well, like a lot of it is around communicating and exploring and discovering in a way that moves beyond, you know, a conversation about I know this and you know that, and basically just, you know, speaking in terms of like the facts that we've been taught at school, you know, to kind of reinforce that reality and actually getting a bit deeper to our own meaning and our own experience of the world. And often that is a really beautiful key to unlock people a little bit, so that they're present to then experience things like the systems game that I spoke of, or like other ways of connecting to the world and actually feeling a bit more deeply about what that means to them, you know. And so an example, like to really ground it in an example with the deep ecology work, we're talking about, you know, how do we really feel about the state of the world, you know, and how often do we actually stop to express that, you know. And so, or how, you know, how do we feel about the way that we're living our lives, and how often do we actually stop to consider what it might be like to change that, because deep down we know we want to, but we're so distracted and so just in a habituated form of living, which is perfect to be in a mechanistic system, you know, to be part of an industrial growth complex where we're not really treated like individuals, but we're treated as parts of a machine, you know. So who wants parts of a machine to be questioning what they really are, and, you know, what their potential might be? You know, you're a cog, you're going to stay in it as a cog forever. It's like, you know, that has like, it makes me kind of emotional thinking like that there are people in the world who still believe that about themselves, you know. This malleable mind that just believes so much of what it's told, rather than actually, and it kind of like cuts us off from actually remaining connected to what we really are. You know, there was that beautiful animation that came out recently. It was Charles Eisenstein narrating it. It was brought out via the Aubrey Marcus podcast. Don't know if you saw it.
Yeah, it was so good.
Yeah, you know, and that seems to be an idea that's coming forward more and more. So we showed that recently in our sort of like, we did like community calls with all of our clients and all of our coaches together, and we showed that, and as a way to kind of frame like, this is what Yes And's about, you know, is finding the others and remembering, seeing what happens when we do that, and seeing what it opens in terms of remembrance. And so the community element is huge for us. Anything that we do.
I was just about to bring that up too. I'm like, it really strikes me that the community aspect of what you guys are doing as being so fundamental, and that's why I'm so drawn to, you know, the work that the organization is doing, is because like, it's hard to find places to, you know, be in this mutual learning, mutual communication, to be in this process of, you know, taking away some of the frames of perception. You know, I have this scientific frame of perception. What does it look like to see that as a frame and to drop it into, you know, expand into a more holistic frame of perception, and like really working with what I'm hearing as you're speaking is like really working with going deeper and deeper into that which is actually like generating meaning, generating our worldview, generating our sense of self. You know, like what is that thing that is at the root of, this is who I think I am, this is how I think I am in relationship to the planet, this is how I think, you know, like what is that fundamental thing that is like, you know, generating all of these different things. And I'm so fascinated with the focus on community, because, you know, in my process of trying to discover these things, I'm like, the biggest thing that has hindered me is not having a reliable community over time. You know, definitely different online spheres where you can share cool ideas, but having this deeper like felt connection and this deeper felt being able to, with other people, go through the deepest process that one can go through, right? It's not easy to find people that are like, let's look at our frames of perceptions together or something like that, or like let's unpack some of the core conditioning that I've been brought up with, given I grew up in this culture or something like that. It's like, but I also have the sense of, I met so many people who are like, yes, I want to do that, I just can't find the community. So it's like everyone, so many people I talk to want to do it, but it's like, I'm getting the sense that there's a bigger need than I previously imagined of just connecting people, of bringing people that all want to do the same thing, but they have no way of like being in the same room together, or like no like incentive or thing that's actually going to build some coherence among them and larger communities of people. And like, I love the work that you guys are doing to just really connect people and give them the tools and techniques to like, right now that we're together, now what do we do? All right, here's some very valuable modalities to use in groups.
Yeah, bro. Yeah, thank you. Thanks so much. Because you're really highlighting the importance of like a shared understanding or a shared language as being crucial for building a community around this work. It's kind of like you want to get with people who are like, oh, I'm not crazy. Oh, wow, yeah, you think that too? Like, whoa, yeah. So yeah, and that's a powerful thing. And you see a lot of right now, there's a lot of communities forming. There's a lot of groups of people getting together with a similar intention or idea, or have been through a similar experience, like sitting with a master plant teacher, or spiritual awakening of some sort, or like even ice baths and breath work. Like that's a whole whole community itself, right? And yeah, it's funny, like some people might call some of that cult like behavior, right? But what's the difference between a cult and a community? I once heard that like a main difference is that cults try and isolate themselves and just like exist outside of everything else, and disappear to some dusty ranch and do weird shit, and like don't really try and integrate into society, because there's still this like us and them. There's still this sense of we've got the answers, and we're going to extract ourselves from the bigger collective because there's poison there, and we want to purify and whatever. And that just feels like it perpetuates separation. Yeah, like
exactly.
And so a community, maybe on the other hand, is a group of people that come together, but there doesn't seem to be a wall around that. Like there's just this openness, or perhaps this is what an ideal community would look like, is some one that's prepared to be open and still connected to others, and those co-communities, kind of collaborations and things like that feel really vital. And it kind of speaks to that idea of ecological consciousness, like ecological co-community networks feel so much more just like supportive of each other, and like there's this way to really grow and share resources, share nutrients, which is super exciting. And so that's that's what sort of Yes And is. We are our own community, and we consider ourselves to be a platform. There's plenty of amazing work happening in the world, and we don't want to try and kind of reinvent the wheel. We're much more about just amplifying and celebrating the work that's already being done. So we have a festival, our annual festival coming up, which I know you're excited about.
Yeah, so excited.
And so a big part of that is creating an experience, creating a journey through. So it's not just like a conference of talks that have some connections and things, but actually like from start to finish, how can we really journey through all of these conversations, journey through the workshops, journey through the dances and the food together, and the conversations, and weave something really beautiful, which is the start of real change from that place. And a way that we love to do that is to bring in these people doing this amazing work, these other communities, these other individuals, and really just see what it's like when they're all in there together. Whoa, it's absolutely magic.
Yeah. Wow. It's so fascinating because you brought up kind of what makes a community a cult versus a generative community. And I had this fascinating conversation yesterday with someone about cult tendency, cult psychology, communities. I shared some of my experiences in this community that I wouldn't describe it as a cult, but it had some of those tendencies in it, right? And what we were speaking about yesterday was that insularity, being insulated, is like the core thing that breaks down, we said, breaks down epistemology, breaks down our ability to make sense of what's happening in the world, right? And like that's exactly what it felt like you just said. You know, if you're insulated, well then you just think that you're the chosen one, or like you guys are doing the best work in the world, and everything outside of it is kind of toxic, and you can't like be in relationship with that at all, right? And this was coming up as well as you were talking about like a shared language, right? Like that, yeah, there does feel like there needs to be a drive for some sort of shared language, but there, even deeper than that, I get the sense of like when you work with like how do we develop our sense of self, our relationship to the ecology, all this stuff, I have the sense of if you speak with someone that has a completely different language, you can almost like go beyond that in a sense and be like, all right, we're both, I can recognize the drive in you, the drive that's in me can recognize the drive that's in you to live a meaningful life, to be in connection with something larger than yourself, even though we have completely different words of describing how we're actually doing that. It's like beyond the words, there's something there. Like, what is that? You know, it doesn't matter if it seems on the surface level like we're talking about different things. Like there's a sense of connection of like, well, first of all, like just we're both human. Like I keep returning to that. Like how powerful is that? We're both human trying to figure out, you know, how to be in connection with something, how to, you know, how to be in connection with life. And then like let's start from that. Even though we have different beliefs and different viewpoints and different perspectives, like let's start with that. And then maybe there's a shared language that will naturally emerge between us in that process of like starting with this shared humanity. Whereas like some of these cults, it's like we all have the same language, it's different from the language of society. We're not, you know, it's this I've heard the term forests of communities or networks of communities. I think forest is the best because we were talking about ecological consciousness and forests this whole conversation. But like, I love how you brought that into explaining Yes And. It's like we are one community. Yes And is one community, but there's forests of community, and we need transparency. We need communication and flow with all the other people doing amazing projects in the world right now.
Yeah, it is. It does lend itself so well. You know, just the concept of a forest, of that kind of that ecosystem, that bio. Yeah, the forest is such a beautiful, just metaphor and also reality. You know, like it's just something that you can use to make so many comparisons, like you said. So like group of human communities are like a forest of communities, and that works so well because when we're in a forest, we feel that sense of everything is here existing together, everything is here living together, and all has its place and its role and its part. And actually a lot of the time, you know, if it's that whole idea of like some plants are weeds and some are not, you know, that's all like contextual. Okay, so if we're growing food and we're doing it in an agricultural way, then weeds are going to be an issue. But actually weeds are, if we take it out of context and just sort of like see nature as what it is, it's all life, and it's all got a right to exist, and it's all got a right to flourish. And actually, even that concept is kind of like, it doesn't need to have a right. It just is, right? It's a beautiful, it's a beautiful opportunity to practice that idea of just like, this is all happening, and we're part of that happening too.
Right. Yeah, we're not separate. I think that the whole fundamental driver for me of exploring interdependence has been like, all right, conceptually, I realized that existing as a human is not separate from the rest of life. But that's not the felt experience. What is the felt experience of not being separate from the rest of life, of the rest of the process of whatever life is doing, I have no way of explaining it. I don't think any of us do. Whatever life is doing right now, we're part of that flow. You know, it's not dead. We're part of that flow. What is it like to experience that? You know, what is it like to experience ourselves as part of the flow of life itself, of whatever you want to call the flow and evolution and continuation, changingness of life.
Yeah, what is it like to experience that? Yeah. What does it take to tune into that experience? Right?
Yeah.
You know, we're curious, we're wondering about it, we're kind of indicating this that it's kind of like a phenomena that we're not really attached to, or like it's a longing, right? It's interesting, like the way you expressed that. Then I felt a bit like, oh, I wonder what that is like, how to describe that. And is that from a space of feeling like we've never actually felt it, or more like it's something that has been felt but it's so difficult to put into words?
I get the sense of, in my personal experience, like it's been glimpsed, but I'm not always in that felt sense, right? So it's like I've glimpsed something. I've been in a state before that felt like this peak state of being part of the flow of life, and then sometimes it's lost, and it was like, whoa, what was that? What was that? I had something there. Now I feel separate again. Now I feel I'm suffering again. Now I'm clinging on to things that are changing. And what was coming up too was like, all my life I wanted to explain it. I'm like I'm trying to I noticed myself, one of my patterns is to be very serious about like, what is life? You know, what is going on? What is this? And then more recently, I've been like, you know, what does it mean to be part of the flow of life? Well, part of it is just dancing. Part of it is enjoying it, you know, like why does being part of the flow of life have to mean like serious contemplation of it? You know, part of it is like, all right, well, we only got one life. Like, let's find ways to appreciate it, which is a lot of times in my experience is not serious contemplation, is not always the best way to appreciate it and to be in that connection with it.
There's yeah, when you speak, it's kind of like there's a certain level of acceptance of not needing to know, right? There's this peak state, this sense of beingness, this appreciation and flow and joy. All of that feels available all of the time, in any moment. And it's simply by dropping the need to understand or categorize, conceptualize, and really get to the bottom of everything in that kind of cognitive way. Like, beyond that is just that acceptance of everything, and to me, that's such a joyful experience. Is that relinquishing, that shrugging off of like, all right, well, I'm just going to enjoy this and be here, and like it just opens things up and cultivates a kind of a sense of presence and a sense of connection, definitely. And so yeah, joy is something that happens for me too, you know, working in development, working in you know, a lot in sort of building community and optimization of my life, optimization of other people's lives, working in personal development, like that, all of that kind of stuff is, there's a lot of research and models and people speaking about the ways that they've done stuff, and yeah, you know, traditions and teachings that are ancient and all of that begs exploration and begs understanding, and it's like, oh yeah, you know, I want to get into that. And often what's at the end of the journey for me is the releasing of that, and then something clicks. You know, it's kind of like Zen for me is a really awesome you know, school of spiritual school and practice. You know, is that a lot of the Zen teachings and quotes, or like, yeah, ways that they frame spiritual knowledge is so perplexing to the mind, but that's exactly the point.
Right.
So it's just like grapple with it all you like until the mind just stops, and then the bliss is revealed. Then
Right.
the truth of it all is revealed.
Mm.
Yeah, just love that. Love that.
Yeah. Yeah. Zen is becoming one of my favorite modalities as well. I'm just enamored with Zen as a practice. I think you were referring koans. Is that what you're trying to get at? The
Koans.
koans. Yeah, like,
Potentially, tell me about koans.
oh yeah, koans basically exactly what you just described. I thought maybe you've heard of them, but without that name before. It's like there's like a phrase. They'll just meditate on this phrase,
Mm, mm.
and the thing is like until they get it, and the only way you can get it is dropping the mind, right? So it's like, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Is one
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
or
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
what was the face before your mother? What was your face before your mother and father were born, or something like that? So they just meditate on these until they actually have like full understanding of them, basically by complete cessation of mind, which I think is so fascinating.
And it's just one way, right?
Yeah, and it's just one way. There's so many other ways. And yeah, it was coming up a lot of like, I want to speak on this optimization point that you started bringing up, which is basically like, I find myself these days getting lost a lot in productivity. Like I have all these like visions that I want to do with my life. And I'm like, all right, well, I can do them more effectively by setting this to-do list every day. And a lot of times I'll just get lost in the to-do list. And then I'm like, where's like the enjoyment of existence, right? And so it's like I find myself like more and more like, all right, how do I like throughout my day, like I'm so focused on optimization, but then the more I go deeper into optimization, I lose what it is I'm actually trying to optimize for by trying to go deeper into optimization. And so I'm like, all right, truly optimizing my life is like, all right, I'm gonna do things, but like 3 times a day, I'm gonna give myself enough space to just like take in the immensity of existence, of life,
Mm.
of just to be in awe at the mystery. Like how can I like infuse my day like a few times a day to just like, I don't know, sometimes I'll do like little mindfulness breaks. Sometimes that does it. But I've been like, all right, how can I like, I'm just gonna like put on this like beautiful music and then just like dance for 5 minutes randomly throughout the day, like something to just be like, all right, I'm doing a lot of work, but like, no, we're still here. We're still here. Like, we're not trying to get there. We're still here. Like, how can I bring it back to like, like a lot of people talk about being here now, but it's like, what is the point of being here now? It's like, well, you're always here. Like, enjoy it. Just enjoy it.
100%. Yeah.
Mm, mm,
Yeah. Yeah. Just reflecting on the nature of a conversation, exploring different topics and bringing up questions and things like that, and how it can be often afterwards, like maybe at the end of this recording, for example, end of this podcast episode, like I'll go outside and walk around and maybe watch the sunset, or like just take a bit of time, even if it was just like, okay, I'm gonna walk to the next thing I need to do. Often it's then that something comes to, and it's like, yeah, I remember the feeling of that experience more than the actual like individual parts of it or the memory of it. Like there's just this
mm,
sense of like, that was awesome. And yeah, why is that reflective part where we feel, um and yeah, what could change if we make space to feel in the moment a bit more, and
mm,
really just feel and just be here, whatever it is that we're doing, whatever. For example, you're speaking about like optimization and doing work, and how there's this way of kind of getting lost in it. Now, what feels like the more achievable thing, is it to break up that work, which might imply continuing to see it as something that needs to be broken up. And it's like, oh, this is work time, and yeah, sure, there are things that take our energy, and there are things that give us energy back. And how much control do we have over shifting our perspective about that? Love
mm,
what you
mm.
do. That was just what was coming up.
Yeah.
Curious.
Yeah, I found that as well. I found myself like, all right, I've worked jobs in the past that I've hated. Now I'm just like, right, like I'm not in a job at the moment. And so I'm like, all right, I'm just going to use this time to just write and create podcasts all day, every day, or like as often as I possibly can. And I'm like, whoa, I just spent like 2 hours writing and it was amazing. I'm like, why can't I just write? You know, why isn't there's definitely jobs out there that where you just write all day, or there's people out there that are authors, you know, like what is stopping me from being an author or something like that, you know? And it's like, yeah, it's I keep going in this loop of like, oh, well, I could get a part-time job and blah, blah, blah. This would be great. It would give me money to go live in this city and all this stuff. And I'm like pulled towards that on one side. And then on another side, I'm like, no, but like I could just like invest in the creative process and see where that leads. And it'll lead somewhere by just really investing in the creative process. And was coming up was like the longing that I don't, maybe we weren't referring to the same longing, but when I'm optimizing this feeling of longing for, oh, I'm like doing this thing, I'm longing to get to this place, or I start longing to get to this place, right? And it's like when I'm like doing writing, I'm not longing to get anywhere. I'm just having fun playing with ideas and mixing things up and editing and trying new styles and stuff like this. I'm not like, oh, I need to get this piece done right now. The more that I'm like, I need to finish this, then it's like it just blocks the creative process because I'm like, I need to finish this. It needs to be done. It needs to be good versus, you know, just the creative process in general. And I have this, I'm imagining that like the workshops that you guys do, I'm imagining the creative flow is there as well, right? When you're in a workshop, I'm imagining you can get so in the flow of it that it's like, this is play. I'm just creatively flowing with this group of people. I'm like, all right, now it feels time to do this technique. All right, here we're gonna do this. We're gonna flow with it, and then you do it, and it's like, wow, we just did a 5-hour workshop or something, and boom, we're buying a flash or something like that.
Successful facilitation is often where the facilitator isn't really like leading or having to do much. The moments of magic for a lot of the workshops and retreats and kind of just any sort of facilitation, even one-to-one coaching is facilitation in a sort, right? Kind of facilitating their process. It's so much around almost becoming like a bit of a mirror or becoming a bit of an orchestrator of the space of on an energetic level as well as on a on a sort of a human level as well. And so sometimes at the beginning of sessions, something that comes through me would be like, I'm not coming with answers. I'm not coming with strict rules or like a magic formula here. I like to think more of myself as a boy who's found a new game, and he's got the pieces, he's got the board, he's got the instructions, but he needs players because it's the other players who come and bring their contributions and their perspectives and their energy that creates the container, creates the magic. And so allowing space for that, allowing that I'm not going to have a and we need the players to bring themselves to the game, like that's where the magic happens. And you often get to the end and people have felt permitted to really be part of that co-creation. And so that's another kind of example of that ecological consciousness, right? Is allowing all the components that make up this beautiful whole to express in their fullness, and be channels for what wants to come through them as well. So yeah, that for me has been a really beautiful experience as well. There's sessions that do fly by, and that there is a certain amount of surrender. And to come back to the thing you mentioned about optimization as well, and doing time blocking and calendars and things, and that can feel restrictive as well. And yeah, perhaps it could be simply addressing the balance between structure and flow, because
Mm-hmm.
my experience has been, yeah, that, you know, some amount of structure is necessary to then appreciate those times of flow, or to allow flow to emerge from within them. And so, yeah, you know, that's been my experience, is like, okay, here's a game we can play, or here's a framework for us to fill out. Here's
Mm-hmm.
a
Yeah.
here's a pencil line drawing for us to color in, you know, to bring a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more to it. And so starting with something, but then, yeah, it's the mind's tendency to get rigid and, oh, but what about this and this, and we can stay in that realm, sure, but it's much more exciting just to allow things to flow at a certain level.
Yeah, I'm continually, as you were speaking, I was continually brought to this metaphor of like the painting and the canvas, right? The painter needs a canvas, needs a restrictive box in order to create something, right? Needs some
Mm-hmm.
sort of structure, unless he's going to be painting on walls and stuff or something like that, you know, like in order to create a beautiful painting, it's like you need to restrict it. In order to create a masterful piece of writing, you need to restrict it to some topic, to some, like, you're not just going to talk about everything in the universe. So you need some sort of topic and restricted frame. And um, I was getting this sense of, well, two things were coming up. One was like, we've spoken a lot about spiral dynamics, but like what was coming up, I think we've spoken of the same topic before, like the stage blue, very structural, hierarchical thing can actually be in service of various other stages of consciousness. And like, you know, it can actually, the structure, although limiting, can be, and if you integrate it in a healthy way, can be in service of, you know, more expansive visions. And yeah, I was just getting this idea of like in the workshops, right? There is a certain structure, but if there's too much structure, there's too much control, not enough flow, not enough surrender, then I would imagine that one of the participants would just, it would be like passive. They'd just be like, all right, I'll let you just like lead the whole workshop. I'll just be passive. I'll be sitting here listening, maybe just doing the exercises. Whereas it feels like if the
Totally.
facilitator is more surrendered, it's like there's a more active role of every single participant. It's like, all right, how is each participant going to step up into their active role? And, you know, I mean, I have a deep sense of being active is more fulfilling than being passive.
For sure, it's all so welcome, and it's yeah, it's really beautiful to see what happens when people feel able to step into their potential or fully express, and yeah, not just be led everywhere. It can be confronting, right? It can be a tricky thing to actually, you know, yeah, embrace that opportunity. Which is then where the facilitation comes in, you know, to sort of set a bit of a container, and um, whatever the modality, there's so many, right? Like our retreats, we use
Right.
ice baths. Have you done much ice, like cold water immersion or ice bath stuff?
I've done a little bit of it, but not recently. I'm like, I don't have the sheer willpower to do it. I need some sort of people to do it with me.
Yeah, and it can really bring up a lot of stuff for people, right? Like facing the sitting in the ice and the body's response, and all the conditioning and the sort of the labels that come up around it. And you
Mm.
know, really fortunate here to have a really like mountain runoff, cold, like really
All
really
right. Yeah.
chilly river just outside my cabin here. And so it's almost a daily thing for me,
Really.
to the point it's like cold is just a label, right? But to get to that point takes a lot. Like, yeah, there's just this, the initial bit is the surrender, right? Like, and obviously for something like that, having a qualified person on hand, or, you know, like obviously beginning that journey in the right way is really important.
Mm-hmm.
um, and yeah, it's been amazing to just have the freedom to then cultivate my own relationship with cold as a teacher, as this opportunity to come into presence and just be, um and move beyond that initial response of like, get out, this water's cold, what are you doing? um, which happens every time still. It's every time, you know.
What, that someone's like, this is way too cold. I'm getting out right now.
Oh, for me personally, like getting into the water, there's this like it's not as loud as it used to be, but there's still this sense of response, of like reaction of,
right.
and so that, yeah, like it's profound how even in, like, I've done a lot of theater and performance and improvisational kind of work as well in my life, and sometimes that can be a really cathartic and really emotional process for people, you know, because it's just touching into something that doesn't normally get a chance to come out, you know. So transformative experiences are really like, yeah, breaking through the habitual ways of thinking and doing, and
Right.
and acting and beliefs and things like that, and actually stretching ourselves, pushing through those perceived limitations in whatever way feels true, in whatever way we get called for. It's all beautiful work, and all of it is necessary, you know, to realize our full potential.
Right. I was kind of astounded by when you said cold is just a label, or like that's like the place you're getting to with more and more ice baths, is reeling like cold is just a label. It's just one experience versus another. Like I'm getting the sense of like duality, you know, like, oh, like cold, warm is good, cold is bad, you know, versus like, nope, they're just two different dualities, polarities, you know. Cold is just a label, warm is just a label, two different experiences. And I was also going back to the workshop thing. I was getting this sense of like, I think a more clear way of explaining what I was getting at before was, you know, you're not going to just have everyone come to a workshop and be like, all right, what are your thoughts? You know, like bring me something. You know, it's going to be like, here's the technique. Only once the technique or the modality is given, then it's easier for people to take an active role in it. It's like, here's the technique, here's the game, here's a way to contribute to this game, and this is what we're doing. Versus like, if you're just like, hey, we're gonna connect with each other, start connecting. You know, it's like, people, I don't know, like, give me some more stuff here. I'm like, how am I like, you know, oh, hi, how are you? Like you need some sort of structure to really call forth the active contribution from people, and to be in that mutual learning.
You know what fascinates me is, as you're speaking, something that comes up is, let's create that.
Right.
What is super curious is, what would that bring up for people if, you know, it'd be funny, you'd almost have to lie to them to get them to come or something like that, but then like, you know, it's interesting. What comes up for me is, let's create that. Let's make a workshop that has no structure. You'd almost have to lie to people to get them to come, right? Because you'd have to be like, this is what we're going to be exploring. Maybe it could be like something like, I don't know, just exploring human connection, or but yeah, no, that the reason I'm feeling this way and thinking about this is because it felt like something came up for you in that concept, or at least putting yourself in that frame of mind, putting yourself in that experience of like, no structure. What would the average person do without any sort of instruction? What would they do without any sort of framework? You know, and just to put everyone in a room together and not say anything, or not like give any instructions, and just say, all right, let's connect. And that, for me, that kind of speaks about emergence, right? That idea of emergent dialogue, or like, yeah, generative dialogue, where there's no topic of conversation necessarily. There's just, we have a course called, it's currently called Listen. It's going to be rebranded soon, but it's all about personal sovereignty and authentic communication, and we explore this very practice of putting a group of people in a space together and just saying, right, no, just start with silence. Just be there and see what comes up, and then if we feel moved to say something, and that can be a really beautiful mirror to get a sense of what does come up for people. Is it uncomfortable to be in complete unknowingness? You know, how conditioned have we become to being told what to do, or what to feel, or what to think, or how things need to be in certain social situations? And what happens when we challenge that? What happens? What is revealed?
I'd be fascinated to see that happen. Awesome.
It wouldn't make a very good podcast.
Let's do a podcast. We're just gonna be silent the whole time. See
Wow,
what comes up.
it'd be an interesting premise, wouldn't it? Like, let's just be here and see what comes through that way.
Awesome. All right, so I'm being conscious of the time here. Is there anything that's still alive, present, anything that feels incomplete that you want to wrap up in this podcast container?
Wow, it's been a real journey, just sort of like tracking back through the conversation and what we've covered, and yeah, it's been beautiful. Thank you for rumbling and just flowing so amazingly and picking out some really cool things from what I've bought, which has been a mixture of coherent and less coherent. Yeah, it's great, man. I really love that idea, of putting things out of the abstract and in dialogue with another, and you do it so well, so thank you. And I guess if anyone wanted to continue the conversation, I'd love to hear from you and stuff. Like, if you can point people to my Instagram or something like that, that would be awesome. But
yeah, for sure. In the show notes, I'll add the Instagram, yes, and website, all the relevant links.
Yeah, great, cool. And the next thing maybe to make the community aware of is our festival. As I mentioned earlier, we've got a hybrid festival happening, which is going to be online. It's also going to be in person in Australia, in Byron Bay, and Bristol in the UK. So we're going to be, it's a really great opportunity to learn a bit more about what we do, and connecting with that community that's growing and growing and becoming an epic forest of its own volition. So I'm going to come and be part of that. Yeah.
And I'll be helping volunteer for the online portion. Right, so come hang out. Awesome. Well, it was a pleasure, man.
It's going to be great having you at the helm on the online component as well. We've got some really cool stuff happening.
I'm so excited to see what we'll do.